This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to the link in the description below so they know that I sent you. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week we're looking at a creature type, Giants. Giants seem to appear on almost every plane and in every color. In all, there have been 151 different Giants printed, and in this video, we're going to look at the 10 that have made the biggest impact on Magic's competitive history. Before we get started though, a quick reminder on how I score these lists. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship, as well as Vintage and Legacy Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. Now, let's get started with number 10. At number 10, I have Countryside Crusher. This card does a pretty great job in terms of flavor because he absolutely loves it when lands go into your graveyard. He can certainly power himself up without any assistance from other cards. However, he was at his most powerful in decks that liked throwing lands in the graveyard anyway. In Standard, this was in decks that ran Seismic Assault, who sought to load up their hand with effects like Ad Nauseam, then discard a ton of lands with the Crusher and the Assault in play to get lethal in a hurry. In Modern, the Crusher was a key card in the Aggro Loam decks that arrived on the scene in 2012. These decks also ran Seismic Assault, along with cards with Dredge, both of which are great for this Giant. His only Pro Tour top 8 came in Extended in 2009 at Pro Tour Austin, where he was featured in a Spectral Zoo deck that ran a bunch of fetch lands and Knight of the Reliquary. It isn't entirely impossible that Countryside Crusher won't at some point find its way into another deck in a format like Modern, but right now, Dredge decks there aren't really interested in running it. At number 9, we have Jotun Grunt, a Giant with Cumulative Upkeep, a mechanic that has a lot of detractors, and it probably should, especially when it was originally designed in Ice Age. It was nothing but an obnoxious downside. However, when Cold Snap came around, Cumulative Upkeep was used in some pretty interesting ways, and Jotun Grunt is an example of that. Here, the upkeep isn't increasing amounts of mana you have to pay. Instead, there have to be more and more cards in either your or your opponent's graveyard, and he's happy. This could even be an upside depending on the situation. If your opponent likes loading up their graveyard, you get a super efficient creature that can disrupt that. If there are cards in your graveyard that you want a chance to draw again, well, Jotun Grunt can help with that too. While he never saw play in Standard, there was never the right kind of metagame for him to really shine, he did see play in Extended and Legacy. In Extended, he was especially effective against Aggro Loam, the same deck that Countryside Crusher was in. While the Crusher and other cards could load up the graveyard, the Grunt made sure you couldn't use it as a resource. That metagame also featured another graveyard-heavy deck, Psychotog. The Grunt was a great asset for aggro decks, who didn't have to give up on having an efficient creature to play graveyard hate. They could have both. These decks were such a big part of the metagame that most decks ran a couple Grunts in the main board and a couple more in the sideboard. In Legacy, it filled a similar role, where it could disrupt Threshold and Reanimation decks. The Crusher hasn't seen play anywhere since 2012, and these days, people seem more interested in more powerful graveyard hate, as opposed to a card that fits nicely on the curve while also going after graveyards, so there's a chance some newer Giants could push the Grunt off of this list. At number 8, we have an Enchantment Giant in Doomwake Giant. A 5-mana 4/6 that, when it enters the battlefield, gives -1/-1 to only your opponent's creatures would already be a pretty good card, but Doomwake here is even better than that thanks to the Constellation mechanic, which can make sure small creatures are never really going to stay in play after this Giant comes down. Fittingly, when he was in Standard, the Giant saw a lot of play in Golgari and Abzan Constellation decks, enchantment-heavy decks that sought to take advantage of that mechanic as much as possible. In addition, he was also featured in Sultai Whip, where he could be a nice situational reanimation target. He was also featured in the sideboards of Abzan and Mardu midrange decks. He has never seen play since rotating out of Standard, and I think it's a long shot that he will. At number 7, we have a Zombie Giant in Diregraph Colossus. The Colossus is a pretty straightforward card, as many tribal playoffs are. I think what makes him really great is that he likes zombies, whether they are coming into play after he comes down or in the graveyard, making it so that, unlike some tribal payoffs, he isn't a complete dud in a world where your board is not populated by a ton of other zombies and you top deck him. And of course, when Standard had both Shadows over Innistrad and Amonkhet, that format was loaded up with good zombies, and that's what allowed the Colossus to really shine. The year 2017 was the year of the zombie deck in Standard, and it was during that time that the Colossus put up all of its points in Mono Black and Orzhov zombie decks. At number 6, we go from a Giant who likes zombies to a Giant who likes Kithkin in Cloudgo Ranger. What makes the Ranger really great is that it doesn't need much additional help to shine, since it comes into play with Kithkin friends either way. Essentially the giant version of Siege Gang Commander, Cloudgo Ranger is pretty insane when you look at its efficiency. For 5 mana you get 6/6 worth of stats across 4 bodies, and if the ground is clogged up, well, you can just send this giant into the air to smash your opponent anyway. This is probably one of the most overpowered uncommons we've ever seen in a limited format, and it was obviously strong enough for constructed as well. In lore, when block constructed, the Ranger saw play, as you would expect, in Kithkin tribal decks. It also saw play in the standard version of those decks, but was far more successful in black-white tokens. Since rotating out of standard, it has picked up one Modern Grand Prix Top 8 back in 2012 in a black-white tokens deck, but that hasn't been a deck that has proven consistent in the format, so it isn't likely to add any points to its score anytime soon. At number 5, we have Sun Titan. As you probably expected, the incredibly powerful Titan cycle occupies several spots on this list, and 4 of the top 5 cards on this list are from that cycle. Here, we have the first member of that cycle we'll talk about, Sun Titan. Like all Titans, it's a 6 mana 6/6 with a keyword ability, Vigilance in this case, and an ability that triggers both when it enters the battlefield and when it attacks. For the Sun Titan, that means it can get permanents with a converted mana cost of 3 or less back from your graveyard, and that's some great value for 6 mana. In Standard, it was featured in some versions of the highly oppressive Cawblade deck, a deck that was pretty much built around the idea of the 2-for-1, as well as in some versions of Birthing Pod. Unlike some of his fellow Titans, though, Sun Titan never caught on outside of Standard. At number 4, we have our next Titan, Grave Titan. His keyword ability is Death Touch, and he makes zombies when he enters the battlefield or attacks, which is, like all the Titans, some pretty incredible value for the mana investment. If this even attacks just twice, finding a way to overcome the zombie horde that he will have with him is no easy task. In Standard, he saw almost all of his points come as a win condition in blue-black control decks. The nice thing about him for control decks is that someone killing him still means you come out ahead, because at least 2 of his zombie friends will be left behind. Unlike Sun Titan, and like the other 2 Titans above it on this list, Grave Titan also saw play outside of Standard. It served as a win condition in extended control decks too, and in Legacy, it has served intermittently as a reanimation target, and that is currently where it's seeing play. At number 3, we have our last remaining creature not from the Titan cycle, and that's Arbor Colossus. Boasting some pretty efficient stats as a 5 mana 6/6 with reach, what makes the Colossus really powerful is his ability to become monstrous, which allows him to not only grow to a massive 9/9, but also punch a flying creature out of the sky. Like most Standard formats, the one that the Colossus was in had lots of powerful flyers who he could take down, such as the various Dragon Lords, Stormbreath Dragon, Ashcloud Phoenix, Thunderbreak Regent, and Nightveil Spectre, among others. He saw the most play in Devotion to Green decks, which had no problem producing enough mana to get him out early, and use his ability quickly too. The Colossus has never seen play outside of Standard, and I don't think it ever will, but it sure killed a lot of flyers while it was in Standard. At number 2, we have the Red Titan, Inferno Titan. He doesn't technically have a keyword ability, but he does have what we call Fire Breathing, which is basically a keyword at this point. On top of that, he divides 3 damage when he comes into play and attacks. This means it isn't really that hard to get a 3-for-1 or better out of the Titan. He saw the most play in Standard, where he was a nice card for people to ramp into. If you could bring him out early, he could usually decimate your opponent's smaller creatures and really be the only thing on the board. He was also a key card in Rug control decks and was a nice card to situationally tutor up in Birthing Pod. In Modern, he frequently appears in the sideboards of Scapeshift decks, where you can bring him in as a win condition against opponents who are too good at disrupting your combo. This Titan even sees some play in Vintage in the eponymously named Inferno Oath deck. This is an Oath of Druids deck, which looks to give the opponent creatures with Forbidden Orchard, and then tutor up the Titan with the Oath of Druids, at which point you get the Titan into play and kill the creature tokens that your Orchard made. This can allow for a turn 2 Inferno Titan, and if your opponent doesn't find a way to kill it, well, they're going to be dead in a hurry. Inferno Titan is likely to continue to add to its score in the future, but I don't think it has a chance of ever catching the number 1 card on this list, which is, surprise, surprise, Permeable Titan. Sometimes when I do MTG top 10s, there is a surprise card at number 1. Not so much this time. I think most people who clicked on this video probably predicted this would be the number 1 card, and you were, of course, correct, because Permeable Titan is super powerful. He comes with Trample and the ability to tutor up lands, any lands, basic or non-basic, when he comes into play or attacks. This allows for some obscene ramping and some powerful combos that make use of non-basic lands. In Standard, it was played in decks that abused Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, and Kessig Wolfrun, both powerful non-basic lands that could win you the game in a hurry. Modern is where the Titan has been really abused, though. In conjunction with Amulet of Vigor, the Titan became incredibly powerful. With the Ravnica bounce lands and Summer Bloom, you could play the Titan quickly, and then search up lands that allowed him to swing for lethal almost immediately. This usually involved Slayer's Stronghold and Sunhome Fortress of the Legion. Eventually, Summer Bloom got banned because of how powerful this deck was, and since then, the Titan has seen less play in Modern, but he hasn't been completely kept in check. He now sees the most play in Scapeshift and Through the Breach decks. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to watch MTG Top 10s I've made in the past, you should see the playlist for them on this screen, so go check them out. Thanks for watching.